What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. The WARWICK rework has finally been added into the champion update schedule on the official League of Legends website to go alongside Ryze and Yorick. And this is pretty cool to see because it means that the WARWICK rework is coming probably before the end of this year. At the very least, it's going to be sometime soon. And although we've known about the WARWICK rework for a long time, he's gone through a tough cycle as the development for that rework actually began before the development for Azir. So he's been a work in progress for probably maybe like 3 or 4 years now. And sure, there's loads of reworks being worked on all the time that get shelved and delayed, but when they finally get added onto the website, you know that it's about to go down and that it's super close to being finally finished and is guaranteed to happen relatively soon. And this WARWICK rework, man, that's hard to say, is going to be on the level of Poppy and the Sion reworks in that he's likely going to get a totally new gameplay design, a full visual update, a new in-game look, some new lore, and all the good stuff that you could expect from a massive rework project. And it's interesting to see as there's actually quite the story behind his development and a lot of details and hints that you can draw conclusions from for what his rework is going to entail. The development for the WARWICK rework began somewhere around late 2013, I think, by lead champion designer Riot Xenon, aka Daniel Klein. He had spent quite a solid amount of time with a few other team members on the project, and he had a gameplay design kit that he described as being relatively decent. However, this was around the time when the Riot Champion Reworks team had just begun, to where they had this totally new department focused solely on creating reworks, and they had really upped the standards of just all rework projects in general. So as for WARWICK, the team that worked on him decided that just being decent wasn't going to cut it, and so they passed on the WARWICK project to the reworks team, and then Daniel Klein would go on to work on Azir. Now the reworks team does things based on a list of priorities. Essentially, they rework the champions who they feel deserve the rework the most first. And at the time, that was Sion, and then there's a couple other minor reworks in there as well. And so at the time, the WARWICK rework was just shelved. However, Daniel Klein mentioned that it's still possible that they might use some of the stuff that he worked on. He was just kind of like postponed, I guess you could say. Although the rework that he had spent time on was going to be a little bit smaller than the one we were actually going to get. And as for the specifics of what he developed, he did tease a couple of concepts a while back when he worked on it. Now this kit was never actually in production. It was kind of just like a gameplay prototype that they had, but it does say a lot about what his eventual rework is likely to contain, since it really tells you pretty much all of the goals that they might have with the WARWICK rework. As for this gameplay prototype, let's jump right into it. His passive was an ability that is very similar to his current existing passive in that it gave him bonus magic damage and healing on auto attacks. But instead, that passive now also had an additional effect similar to Ginsu's Rage Blade. Every time he hit someone, he got a stack up to a maximum of 10, and each stack would increase the power of the heal effect by 11%. And that passive, instead of dealing a flat amount of magic damage, would deal 2% bonus maximum HP damage. Only the healing amount scaled up with the stacks, though the damage did not, and it was designed this way to give him some sort of a barrier behind his drain tanking. They want WARWICK to be able to have to interact with his opponent and start to brawl it out before he actually starts to heal for a million. His Q remained as almost the same ability, kind of, but they lowered the base damage and the AP ratios and instead gave it the effect to proc on hit effects and the new passive twice, with the healing component on the Q specifically removed. However, with the new passive, the ability would still heal for quite a lot, and since it procs the passive twice, you could heal for as much as 440% of the original passive value if you had max stacks, which would end up being somewhere around 200 HP or so in the late game. So when the healing component was probably lowered a little bit, but with some on-hit effects, this could be dealing just tons of damage, and it looks like they want to make him be some kind of champion where his offensive power is about proccing on hit effects constantly and making use of them really well to maybe be like a drain tanking skirmisher. The Q though also did have a lowered cooldown and a lowered mana cost by a lot, so it might have actually been stronger than it sounds. His W was changed into a completely new ability called Howl, which was an area of effect fear away from the center of its original cast location. It was a really short-lasting fear, but it also had a follow-up slow on it. The goal with this ability was to give WARWICK the ability to interact and gank lanes before he hit level 6, and to not completely rely on his ultimate to actually be able to do stuff throughout the entire game. It's an interesting effect that also had a pretty cool interaction with his new E ability, which we're just about to get to. Overall, the idea of giving WARWICK Warwick some fighting power outside of his ultimate is something that's probably going to be one of, if not the biggest component of his rework, and is definitely something you should expect to see. His E was changed to have an active component on it. The passive component was pretty much the same as his own Blood Scent ability is now, but the active was this boomerang kind of move called Hamstring. You would stand at one point and then click on a target location, and then you would dash to that location and then instantly, without any delay, dash back to where you originally casted it, applying a super strong but also super short slow on opponents that you hit in between the dash. And you could cast his W and stuff like Smite during this ability. You couldn't cast his Q though. So you would use the dash and then you cast the new W, his fear, and then you get an opponent to essentially just run into the rest of your team because of the mechanics of the fear. Daniel Klein mentioned that this ability especially, although it might sound kind of lame on paper, was actually super fun to play with and was a really cool skill. So I would say that this ability specifically is the one that has the most potential to end up as one of his future abilities from that original gameplay prototype. As for his ultimate, it was changed to have like a Sejuani Q kind of cast where you throw yourself out in a targeted direction as a skill shot, and then if you actually hit someone, then the ability actually lands and you hit the champion and you would ult them almost exactly as his current ultimate is now, you know, with a bunch of damage and a really long crowd control effect. But yes, his ultimate is almost certainly going to become a skill shot. However, the designers mentioned that there were a lot of things they were unsure about with this specific type of ability design. First off, they didn't really like how it could be used as an escape, since it was just a skill shot based dash. And secondly, they messed around with a bunch of different versions where the cooldown would get lowered if you did something in some way, so that might also be a possibility. One thing though that they did add as a trade-off, I guess, for making it a skill shot, is that Warwick would get a 20% damage reduction from all sources when he's in the ultimate. And one thing to note is that if you cast your Q immediately after, then you would get 8 out of the 10 stacks of your passive, so it was a super strong ability in skirmishes and 1v1 scenarios. So this gameplay prototype overall explains a lot, pretty much all of the goals probably that they have, which you could definitely expect Warwick's new design to fulfill, even though it's almost certainly not going to be a carbon copy of this prototype. And as for what those goals are, first off, his drain tanking is going to have some sort of interaction with opponents. He's not going to be able to just heal for a million at will, but when he gets his stacks going in prolonged fights, he's definitely still going to be a beast. Secondly, they want to give him something to do and an ability to make plays outside of just his ultimate, so that you'll be able to gank lanes before level 6, and you'll be able to gank when your ultimate is on cooldown, and have some sort of in-combat effectiveness in prolonged skirmishes, with reasonable effectiveness too once the rework goes live. And as well, they want to make his ultimate a skill shot, which is relatively fair honestly, since they're giving him so much more utility overall in other places that they have to take away something in his kit somewhere. And as well, they want to separate his tanky and his damage playstyles by a reasonable amount to give you more meaningful trade-offs, and his damage style will likely be very on-hit based and still probably involve some magic damage. Now once again, that prototype was just that, a prototype, and it didn't make it anywhere past the conceptual phase, and that was the version of the Warwick rework that was designed by Daniel Klein, who also designed Lucian, Azir, Tahm Kench, and more recently Talia, as well as the Xerath rework. Now the current version of the Warwick rework is now being designed by Riot Certainly T, who kind of has a notorious reputation for doing some crazy stuff in the past. However, he actually designed the Caitlyn rework, so I would say that his reworks are a lot different from his champion designing style, and I for one am definitely fond of his work, and I think he'll do a great job, and the goals outlined previously will pretty much all be accomplished in some way, shape, or form. But apart from that, it's definitely exciting because this rework is also likely going to make him a lot more fun and interesting to play, which will be super cool to see. And I don't know about you guys, but to me that prototype did actually sound pretty damn sweet. So look out for the Warwick rework coming out sometime in the future. My guess would be probably in the second half of 2016 or maybe very early 2017 at the latest. And looks like that's going to be it for me. Thanks for watching. Drop a rating if you enjoyed, subscribe if you want, and I'll see you guys next time.